So why don't you go to the store and get a CDR and make your own disks? So they've screwed you many times, actually. They took your space, they stole your space, they took your time, and they no longer give you disks, and you had to go buy your own disk and make your own disk. But somehow they've convinced everybody that that was a really good thing. So the ATA Command Committee adds this command. And there's a second one, because Dell, not to be outdone, Dell and HP make some sort of agreement, and they go and ask for the same thing, but another one, called the DCO. The DCO we don't generally use. It is used on some machines and has to be cleared or something. The DeepSpar does not care if there's a DCO. It copies the drive anyway. So DCO is exactly the same thing as an HPA. It's just a second one. And they can be used together. You can have an HPA and a DCO. The DCO has to be set first. Hey, how you doing? Yeah, can you just put it back there? Do you need me to sign anything?
No, you're good.
All right, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. And you're all taken care of? She put tip and everything on there?
Yeah. You got plates of stuff right here.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Have a good one.
You too. So, to regurgitate this, a HPA and a DCO can exist on the same hard drive. You can have two utility partitions that are not easily accessible to the end user. You cannot boot in Windows and then see those two. You have to use a special tool to address them or do something with it. The DCO we do not use in data recovery. It may exist on the drive. We mostly ignore it or clear it. And if we need to image it, the DeepSpar will image it, the Atola will image it, the PC2000 will image it without making a change to the drive. You do not need to clear them in order to make the change and image them. Some tools, like the Falcon, the Voom, hard copy, Tableaus, some of them need to clear them in order to get access to them because they don't know how to control them. They're not an intelligent machine. They're using some Linux derivative with DD on them, and they don't know how to do anything with it, so they clear them and reset them. And sometimes they never reset them back. You made a change to the drive that actually did affect the user's data, and you'd have to testify about that in court correctly. You also set a setting that may keep the drive from booting again. It may not boot correctly after you change the HPA if you don't put it back. Okay? So, this is the one we care about, host protected. In data recovery, we use this every day. I copied a 100 gig drive to a 200 gig drive. How do I keep the 200 gig from being accessible? I set an HPA equal to 100 gigs. I chop it off. Does that make sense? It literally is, and I need to make sure that this is super clear to people. So, my drive, it will always do this. It will never do anything else. I have sectors, L, B, A, 0. If I want to set an HPA, these are the sectors I lose. I lose the tail of the drive. So when I set an HPA here, I am setting an HPA into the disk, and from there to the end of the disk is what's unavailable. So I'm setting this drive, which would have been LBA 0 to max, and let's say it was 100 gigs, and I want to set it to 50 gigs. I'm literally chopping the drive in half, and from here on, this is no longer accessible to me and my user. I made a 100 gig drive a 50 gig drive. Happy? Ironically, you can also do the opposite. You can make a 100 gig drive a 200 gig drive. What will happen is you'll get to 100 gig while you're writing, and then it will crash. The reason that you can, I don't know that they specifically chose the reason to do that. What it is useful for are like LaCie drives. If you've ever seen a LaCie drive, they basically made a bridge board, and the bridge board says, I have a 500 gig drive and a 500 gig drive. I'm going to concatenate the two together. I put a HPA on the first drive that says I am 1 terabyte. And then they have a board that renumbers, and that's all it does. At 500 gigs, it says add 500 gigs. And then from then on, every time it writes something, it reallocates that to the next sector correctly. It just renumbers all the LBA blocks for the second drive. Does that make sense? So there are a lot of tools that actually do that. There's a lot of equipment that takes advantage of concatenating two drives together by setting an HPA on the first and then just adding something to the second to add those LBA blocks. Okay? So it is done in hardware most of the time in those situations. Otherwise, it's technically a RAID or a JBOD or something along those lines with other items. Okay? So it is possible to set the number higher, and you will see it from time to time. And if you do, then you know that there's probably a second drive somewhere, just so you know. If I plug in a 500 gig drive and I look at it on the screen and it says it's a 1 terabyte, I'll be like, what happened here? So, all right, everybody good so far? So the whole point is I'm chopping this off. Inside of Windows, I will not be able to see this area at all, period. Windows will never show me this area if I chop it off, okay? The whole point being is the deep sparse data is right here. If you set the HPA at the beginning when you're trying to choose a tree and you're trying to do these flags, the deep spar cannot talk to its own data in the Windows program. So if you do what I just did, where I saw the tree and I flagged it, the deep spar will not see it as a drive that the deep spar knows anything about. So you have to be cautious of when you use this. At the end of every recovery, I always set the HPA equal to the source. So that way I'm always chopping off whatever I didn't use. I don't ever want to process that. I don't want to, some programs when you're doing data recovery want to scan the whole hard drive. And I don't want to scan the whole hard drive. I only want to scan the data that's related to the user source. Okay? So at the end of every time I image, I will come to this window, I will come here at the end and I'm going to say, I am done with my recovery. I've done the best I ever can do. I've got that number as small as possible. There is a statistics screen that tells you how successful you've been, and we'll get there. But right now my whole point is, I'm going to come here, I'm going to go to the destination drive, and I will do 3 things. I will set this is actually 2 commands added together as one. It says, look at the source, how big are you? I have 100 gigs. Then come over here and apply it. So it will now make my drive that size. So that's number 1. Number 2, I will come down here and I will say that I want to wipe unprocessed sectors. That way any sector that was not copied, that's either in error or doesn't belong, is erased. So that I have zeros there and I don't accidentally give somebody the wrong data. Okay? Because in forensics, you wipe hard drives ahead of time and you keep them sanitized. In data recovery, we're 8 drives a day. We don't have time for that shit. We just go ahead and do it. We just, hey, there's another drive on the shelf. Let's do our copy. And then you're copying data over that, so then you only erase the sectors you don't need. So at the end you're done, you might only have 10. So why waste 3 days in wiping a drive? Okay? And then the last one is, and this is the only time I change, if I'm doing forensics drives, I do not do the MBR right away. I might use a write blocker because I have one. But most data recovery people do not own a write blocker. So in that case, they switch this to MBR so that it would be inactive inside of Windows. Okay? So those are my 3 items. I almost always do all 3 unless that's the only one that I don't do. I'm not going to set this HPA quite yet. I want to do one thing and show you one other thing before we eat lunch. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to deactivate this MBR again. Okay? So now I go to home, I hit F3, you see that I've changed the sector, 55BB. I'm going to show you what happens inside of Windows to a partition when I take that 55BB and I plug that into the machine. Now, on an XP machine, this box, instead of being a little red arrow, would have a little circle around it. It would be like a little circle that says, I'm not working. And this is one thing that none of these IT guys ever knew all this time, is the only thing that tells the Windows system that this box is working or not working is 55AA or 55BB. 55AA tells it I'm initialized. If you initialize a drive, it redoes the MBR and changes it to 55AA. So it'd be nothing when you bought the drive, it'd be blank. So when you plug in the drive, and it would typically do this at the beginning, so if this was closed and I went to it, now again I'm on a Windows 7, I don't know what it's going to do. When I do this, it'll say drive is not initialized. Do you want to initialize it? That's bad. Bad, bad, bad. Do not click that button at all, because it will recreate that. And I have data in that. Understand what I mean? So I want it to be that. So now you'll see, so I have this drive. Dang it. I have this drive. It was a 300 gig drive. I did not set an HPA. If I had, it would be 100 gigs. Right now, the DeepSpar has access to that data. The MBR is gone, so it doesn't have the ability to do this. So now the DeepSpar doesn't have access to see everything that it needs to see in this case. But and it should work. It should. This is a new version again, and this is where stuff always goes wrong. Blah, 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 because who cares? So there it is. So the DeepSpar sees everything. It knows what it processed. It knows that I asked for those sectors. The dots now mean the sectors that are the ones that I selected in my flag. And so it can process this tree and do it. Okay? So I still have access to it. I didn't need 55BB AA to be there. So I can still see it. And I can't show you quite here. I can switch to another machine. This software only runs on 64-bit now. So I've had to switch from my normal 32-bit to 64-bit to do this demo. If I set the HPA, that'll be gone. But this thing right here, the initialization for this is 100% done by 55AABB. If AA is there, it'll be fine, it'll be healthy, happy, online. Doesn't matter what the rest of the data is. So I have a real partition there, I have real data there. There's content there. All I have is 55BB. So Windows does not know this. So RAID arrays. If you've been working on RAID arrays before and you've had to reassemble a RAID array, once you get those drives and you stack them in here, you'll notice they always say that they're red, they don't have because they're not initialized. None of them have that. And some people think for some reason you've got to initialize them for Windows to see them. If you do that, you ruined your RAID array because you just overwrote all the first sectors of all your drives. Those sectors have actual data in them. They're striped, they're RAID 5, there's other stuff there, there's configuration data. You've ruined them. Or they'll say foreign, don't belong to this system or this array. Those are all initialization things. So that being tracked is 100%. Most people don't even realize you right-click on this box and you say initialize. So most people don't even realize that that's even an option. But that's just creating the MBR. Everybody with me? So that's what screws everything up. Everybody playing with that, doing that. It's completely fine for me to have this drive set up like this. And if I take this drive, just to give you an example, here's a Windows XP system. I'm going to do the same thing. Here's my machine, Windows XP. The reason I'm showing you this is I have data recovery software over here. I don't have it on the Atola machine. See, shows up, initialized, not initialized. I'm going to shrink this box down. I'm going to open the cheapest, most affordable, most versatile software that there is on planet Earth, RStudios. It's ugly as crap, but it has some super powerful functions. For 79 bucks, it does all kinds of things nothing else does, and it has a pretty powerful hex editor in it. A hex editor that's worth the $79 by itself. Yeah. It's a super powerful hex editor. All right, so in this list now I have my drives. You can see, even though I did not mount it in Windows, and Windows can't see it, and Explorer wouldn't activate it, it is here, Francisco Telemonte. It knows NTFS because it processed number 7. In the MBR, it still looked at it. That's why it knows it's NTFS. On sector 63, it has a string that says NTFS. So it looked at those things and it knows I have a partition. The only way it found the partition was the first sector, because I didn't search for a partition. So this is mounted inside their software. Then I have this unallocated space of 200 gigs. If I had set an HPA, I would just not see this piece. I would normally set an HPA so I don't see that piece by accident. I do not want a partition that's screwed up Because people do this kind of thing all the time. They come here, they right click on whatever software they have, they see the word scan, they hit scan and they go to town, right? That's going to scan the whole hard drive, including the 200 gigs that I did not have, and whatever data is in there that I'm going to give to somebody is going to come out of that 200 gigs. Bad news, bad news. Everybody good so far? So that's the big deal. Once you get this far, if I had been this far, and I didn't let the image finish. Remember, I for speed and for time, I did not let it image all of Francisco Pelamonte, so I don't know how much of Francisco Pelamonte off the top of my head I have. But I right-click on Francisco Pelamonte. This called Open Drive Files. Now, this is where the rubber hits the road. This process, every one of these, almost every data recovery tool has options, and they should all kind of agree on the name, but they don't. What there should have been is called process MFT. That's what the words should have been. If I process just the MFT, it is the same thing the DeepSpar used to build the tree. I have the MFT entries, I have all the metadata. I might not have all the data, but I have the tree. It's a very small thing. It's like an Excel file that tells you where all my files are, right? So I did process that. I have that. This tool can process that without scanning the drive. So I'm going to process it. It's going to read all of the MFT entries, which are all the allocated items, not the unallocated items. It's going to process this tree and try to rebuild it, even if it's damaged. It's going to try to build me a tree. And then when I'm done, I'll have the structure that I saw inside of the DeepSpar. But I did not image this whole hard drive. So I did start imaging my documents and settings. I started Francisco Pelamonte, and just to see, since it's the majority of what's here, here are some pictures. Here's his hot girlfriend, and we'll see if I can actually process that file. So I did image far enough to get a file off the drive. Does that make sense? Everybody good so far? So that's entirely the whole point that I'm trying to be. I can be surgical. I can go specifically after things and waited the few minutes that I needed. It would take less than an hour. It's been like 40 minutes for me to get 74 gigs of photos or pictures. And so I would have that entire folder or, you know, whatever else. I mean, there's some other things, but so I got enough to be able to produce that kind of thing, even if I had a damaged drive ahead that wasn't working, something off, turned off, or whatever else. Whatever I got, I can try to get the best of. Everybody good so far? So this is the power that we're going to try to use today. There are more commands that I can go through to explain how everything works, and then I'll go through configuration stuff later to try to get you to understand that. But right now, after lunch, what we're going to immediately do is we're going to skip to the section that says we're going to rebuild hard drives, and I'm going to walk you through rebuilding a hard drive and all the problems that you'll have, and then you're going to do it, trial by fire. Okay? So I found that that's the best way to do it, is throw people into the fire. Every drive will be different. Every drive will look different. They are purposely done that way. I did not purposely make them all the same and walk you through step by step for every single thing. Once you get into it, you'll start to see it's all the same. It doesn't make any difference. Just like a car, you can drive them all. Okay? Unless you have to drive on the other side of the road in Australia, and then it becomes different. All right, everybody good so far? So let's eat while it's still warm.